Closings don't fall apart on closing day. They start falling apart weeks before. At this point, thousands and thousands of real estate closings in North Carolina. I know those things to watch out for so that this doesn't happen to you. The first thing is missing deadlines, and I'm talking about things like the due diligence end date, your lender's rate lock expiration, the actual settlement date. When does the wire have to be sent before closing so that you can close on the settlement date? Don't let these things sneak up on you. If you really want to embrace technology, use a shared calendar with your clients and calendar these deadlines so that they know when these things are coming up. But at minimum, you can make a checklist or some sort of summary sheet with the critical deadlines on it and give it to your client so that they know when things are happening. Because while our North Carolina standard offer to purchase is pretty clear and easy to read, it's not all on one page, and you got to flip through a couple different pages in this current version to find different important dates and when things need to happen. So using some sort of shared calendar, providing a summary sheet is definite value add. And same thing for buyers. I'm looking at you. If your agent doesn't do this for you and you've seen this video, then you know there's something you can do to make sure no deadlines are missed, and that's by keeping a calendar or a list of important dates. Now, a good trick is if you've got a shared calendar, set a reminder 7 days before and 48 hours before the deadline is coming up so that you can be at least a week ahead to start of any potential issues. And then 48 hours before, if for some reason this snuck up on you, you've got a little bit of time to address problems so that you don't just blow a deadline. Things like a missed due diligence date. If you want to terminate and you're wrong about the due diligence date, in North Carolina, you could be putting even more of your deposits on the line and giving up deposits if you don't terminate timely. So the deadlines are really important. The next thing is communication. We see poor communication between the parties make a closing blow up faster than anything else. And this is because usually everyone assumes that someone else is doing something. It's really no fault of any of the parties if you feel this way. It's just lack of going through the process before. Oftentimes, or maybe having some inexperienced people involved in the process who just assume it's being taken care of by someone else. So if you're a buyer and you think your agent has told everybody everything they need to know, maybe don't assume, just confirm. Same thing with sellers. If you think that your agent obtains your payoff for you, I've personally never seen an agent do that, and I don't know how they would without the seller's involvement. So not making assumptions about who is telling whom what. And my feeling on it is I would rather be given the same piece of information from the lender, from the buyer, from the buyer's agent, from all kinds of people than to never be told. And it is one of the most frustrating things to be at the closing table and someone tell you, oh, I see this invoice missing from the closing statement. And it's something that I, as a closing attorney or my paralegal, have never even heard about. We didn't know that it was, we haven't been given any sort of due diligence repair request. We haven't been told there needs to be something paid on the closing statement, and we're finding out at the table. And the clients aren't super happy either because they think someone else told us. So they're wondering who dropped the ball here. And a good way to prevent this from being an issue is just making it clear in communications. All right, you're talking to your buyer, or you're a buyer talking to your agent, and you know that the sellers agreed to pay for something on the closing statement. Confirm who is going to tell the attorney, or who is going to make sure that this gets relayed to the proper parties. And don't just assume that someone else is doing it. Just be clear up front of who is responsible to do it, and then hold that person accountable to make sure that it gets done. Now, a good way to go about this is just to kind of assign a communication lead so that you're not having to decide every single time something needs to be communicated who's going to do it. But this usually default is the agent, your agent that's representing you if you're a buyer or a seller, or agents, the deal. If you've been doing this any length of time, you're usually in charge of making sure that people know what they need to know when they need to know it by. The other thing is last minute surprises. And often poor communication leads to last minute surprises like those pesky invoices I was telling you about, but it can go far beyond just invoices. So these are things like, okay, maybe a survey shows an encroachment, or agreed upon repairs weren't done. Maybe you have a seller that you're listing their property and they just neglected to tell you that they're in foreclosure, or they got a foreclosure notice after you got the property on the market. Pretty big deal. You can make yourself a safety net by basically making yourself a pre-closing checklist. And this would be everything that you need to follow up on before the actual closing day. And this would include things like verifying that the title is clear. So while the attorney is responsible for performing the title search And in my experience, attorneys will notify you of title issues. If for some reason you're working with an attorney that doesn't do that, then reach out to say, hey, are we good? Is title clear? Do we have any problems? That way you can check it off of your list and know that you're good. There's not going to be a title issue that comes up the day before closing that you're now going to have to try to find a solution for that sometimes is not simple to do. The other thing is making sure that all the repairs are completed. So if you've got a transaction where repairs were agreed upon, we have closings all the time where the morning of closing during the walkthrough, they're finding out at that point that the repairs weren't done. So it's important that you're verifying that the repairs were done, and this could be on your checklist, whether you obtain paid receipts. Maybe you have an earlier walkthrough before just the morning of the closing to make sure that's done, but making sure that you do that before you get to the closing table to make sure the repairs were done will prevent issues and delays and last minute surprises. Another thing is making sure that payoffs were obtained and that the HOAs the estoppels were obtained and the transfer fees were paid. And if you're on the seller side of things and you're the agent, the best thing you can do is have your seller promptly return their seller information sheet with the payoff request, and when they are requested by the closing attorney to pay the transfer fee or the fee for obtaining the estoppel, that they do so immediately. And that's because the contract now says the seller has to pay those things immediately. It is not anyone else's responsibility to pay for those items under the North Carolina contract, and it's not the attorney's responsibility or requirement to front those items for the seller. Think about it. If you have a transaction where the attorney is prepaying these items for a seller as a courtesy and hoping to get repaid, and the transaction falls through, then now the attorney is paid for something that's a seller obligation and they're never getting reimbursed, and you'll have a seller ghost you and just not pay you. These are the things that a seller, if they're digging in their heels because they don't think it's their responsibility, or they're like, I'm under contract now, let the buyer do their stuff, I'll get to the info sheets whenever. Well, if your lender takes 10 days to return a payoff and you get it to us 8 days before closing, we've now missed the settlement date, and that is going to be a fault of the seller for not timely providing information. So agents, please have your sellers return that information timely. Add this to your checklist to confirm when the seller has returned the information. You don't have to be in the middle of sending the information, but confirm with them that they have done it. Another thing to add to your checklist is making sure that if your client has to send funds, that they know how to do so, that they've obtained the wire instructions directly from the closing attorney, that you have educated them about wire fraud so that they know what to look out for, and that they will never ever send funds without confirming that the wire instructions are accurate, and then also making sure that the funds have been received by the place that needs to receive them. And then finally on your checklist, this is not comprehensive, but these are just some of the major things, that you actually review the settlement statement when you receive it. So, sometimes you don't get the final settlement statement a lot of in advance, like you really wish you would, but that's due to a lot of factors, because we might be waiting on payoffs, we might be waiting on HOAs, we might be waiting on something from the lender, we don't know. So if we have to wait until a final information is actually received to get a final settlement statement, it really helps a lot if you review that timely or promptly upon receipt so that we can make any corrections needed. Or even worse, when you do have the settlement statement in plenty of time and you don't look at it in the 4 days before closing, and then you tell us at the closing table that there's an invoice that's missing, that can be a little bit frustrating because you didn't review the statement when you had it. So whenever you get it, whether it's 4 days before, 4 hours before, try to look at it as promptly as possible and notify who needs to know if there's something that needs to be corrected. The next thing that causes hiccups is unclear expectations. And agents really help this a lot when they set their clients up for success by explaining expectations. Like for a buyer, what actually happens on closing day? When do you have to send the funds in? When are we going to do our walkthrough? Generally, what are you going to sign, and about how long will it take? When do you get your keys? When does the deed record? We have so many people every single week that have either not had the conversation with their agent, or the agent hasn't set expectations, and they have a moving truck in our parking lot or across the street, and they think they can walk out with their keys and go into their house and move in because they haven't been educated about funding and recording and the time that it takes, and that they don't get their keys until the deed is recorded, unless you have a really nice seller or a seller that's comfortable handing them over, but they're not required by law to do so. Same thing on the seller side. We'll have sellers that they're upset that we can't give them their proceeds check at the table, and that's against the law unless the deed has recorded. I can't disperse any funds to anybody until the deed has recorded. So not just sellers will sometimes have agents that are like, well, just give me my check. So-and-so other attorney does it. Well, we're not so-and-so other attorney. We follow the law. We're not going to give anybody's money until the deed is recorded. So that can lead to people sitting in our lobby and waiting for the deed to record because they thought they would leave the office with a check in hand. So helping those expectations up front really helps closing day go more smoothly. Another thing you can do here is also let your people know about potential hiccups. Because there could be a situation where, all right, everybody signed everything, you send everything back to the lender because you need funding approval. Lenders don't always send their money before the closing. Some lenders have to review every signed document and sign off on it before they'll even send us their wire. So if you have a lender that, has a funding approval, they have to review the whole package and it takes them some time to release their wire. If you're closing at 4 p.m. and your lender needs funding approval, the likelihood that you record the same day is slim to none. So these are things that you can tell your clients about of, okay, seller, we've chosen to close at 4 p.m. But because of these things, it is really unlikely that you're going to get any funds today because it's not likely to record until tomorrow. A pro tip here is you can prepare your own, what happens at closing. This is how closing is going to go, whatever you want to call it, guide, and send it to your clients 3 to 5 days before closing because it gives them, just in case you've forgotten to say it or in case you've told them and they've forgotten, now they have a handy reference sheet to know what to expect once they get to closing day. And then finally, if nobody is project managing the deal, agents, this usually falls to you to be the project manager for your clients. And you can really be the glue of the transaction by making sure that your clients know where to be and when to sign, that they know what they have to bring to closing, like their ID, their checkbook for, wiring instructions, etc. And making sure that nobody really is lost in the process and that everyone has done their part so that we can actually get to closing. And some of these things, while it seems like a heavy lift to be the one to have to remind your clients on every single transaction, hey, make sure you bring your ID. This is when we're closing. You could use technology to aid you in that. Perhaps you have calendar appointments and it sends reminders to your clients with the details of this is where the closing is and don't forget to bring your ID and this is what you'll need for your wiring instructions. And by the way, it doesn't record until all the funds are in, etc. So try to think of ways to minimize the administrative load on you, but still make sure that you're keeping everyone informed. So all of these little things add up to the big thing, which is a smooth closing. And if you like smooth closings, so do we. If you're wanting to do a closing in the Lake Norman area, Thomas & Weber would love to help you. Send your contracts to close@thomasandweber.com.